Hi, everyone. This is a very special episode of Ask the Captain, and I've been inundated with questions about the tragic accident over in India, Air India 171. And I wanted to try to attempt to answer some of your questions because I know many of you are got more questions than you have answers. So I've compiled a whole bunch of them here. We're going to try to be very respectful to this issue and try to answer these questions. So let's jump into the first one. Wade U2V writes, how did the sole survivor manage to survive such a catastrophic crash? Well, that's a great question. I would love to talk to him someday. Where he was seated in the airplane was right in front of the main wing spar. So the wings that are beefed up in certain areas, and the hardest, probably heaviest portion of the airplane, the single engine, the single thing is called the wing spar. And he was directly in front of that wing spar. Did the wing spar take a lot of the hit and the impact? And he just happened to be in a place. He's also looked to me like a pretty strong strapping guy. But the fact that he was the only person that walked away from that is absolutely a miracle. And, I'm scratching my head about that one as well. All right, 32 Trace Blue. These are some longer, more technical questions, but let's get into them because they're good. Captain, many of us saw videos where the landing gear was visibly down throughout the short flight. Why might the pilots have not retracted the gear, and could this have been a primary factor? There's no saying that they didn't try to retract the gear. Gary B. Pilot, he's got a great channel on YouTube. Go check him out. Gary B. as in baseball, Pilot. He did a really good one on this just a couple of days ago. I think it's got like almost 2 million views, where he shows that the wheels that normally are canted forward like this, but when you raise the gear handle, they electrically cant like this. And as you're looking at that airplane, they were canted in this direction. So is that some indication that they actually raised the gear handle? It could be. Now it could be that at that point they had already lost their engines, the rat deployed. The rat provides hydraulic pressure, but not enough to bring those gear up. The electrical function of bringing that up, there might have been enough electricity to do that, but not enough to bring them into the wheel well. So I'm here to say that they probably did raise the handle, but the gear just didn't come up. Good question. Mike Mahoney Media writes, what's the ram air turbine, known as the rat, and why is its deployment so significant? Well, I treated that in a couple of videos, but the ram air turbine, is a kind of an instrument of last resort. On almost every commercial jet has a rat. And if on the 787, if there's a major electrical failure, a major hydraulic failure, or there's a dual engine flameout, both engines stop producing thrust, then the rat will deploy to provide some electric, enough for some instruments for the captain to fly the airplane and to talk on the radios. It'll provide enough hydraulic pressure to be able to fly the airplane. It's really hard to fly, but you can turn it and so forth. The landing gear can be deployed because they will free fall down, and but that's the minimal. It's got to be a dual engine failure. It's not simply pulling the power levers back to idle. That does not deploy the rat, but that's why the rat is there. It's really designed for a high altitude dual engine power loss to give the pilots the potential of gliding the airplane all the way down to a landing and being able to steer it. That's what the rat's there for. 80s Zach writes, are there warning systems that alert pilots to impending thrust failure? There's a warning system for just about everything. And if we did have a loss of thrust while they were still on the ground, they would certainly know that. They would get a bell in the airplane, and they would certainly get a light. They would see the rollback of the engines. The first indication that you have that you're losing thrust or a significant amount of thrust is right here. Almost everything that happens on an airplane happens in your ears first. You would hear it. And I guarantee you, these guys, once they rotated and they had a normal rotation, and maybe they asked for gear up, but they just didn't get quite that far, they heard something very quickly after that, and that was the rollback of the engines. And that's a frightening thing indeed. So the first indication is here. But yeah, there are other indications up there. All right, Echo Miles writes, the sole survivor reportedly heard a loud bang shortly after takeoff, or about 30 seconds into the flight. What could have caused such a sound, and how might it relate to a potential thrust failure or other system malfunction? Yep, I heard that report too. It would be consistent with the deployment of the rat. It could be that they hit something on the way down, before the major part of the airplane struck. Maybe something else hit. That could have been it. This guy went through a traumatic stress in his life. How sharp are your thoughts after that? who knows? But let's take him at his word, and that's what really happened. I think it's most likely that he heard the rat deployed, and then once the rat comes out into the airstream, it's going to slam down. That little propeller is going to begin to spin like crazy, and it's going to start producing electricity for the inside of the airplane, and that would most likely cause the lights to flicker. So now that's consistent with a rat deployment. Good question. Kale Tonic 42 writes, there's a lot of discussion about the flaps. Some say they looked retracted, clean wing, while others point to wreckage photos showing flaps slats deployed. What's your analysis on the flap configuration based on the available footage and report? So I think I was one that originally said it was a possibility that they could have been prematurely or mistakenly retracted. I'm saying that that's not a possibility now. Let me be very clear on that. I don't think the pilot made a mistake and grabbed the wrong handle. I think it's clear from the fact that they would have how the airplane was flying. In the photos, you can't tell. It's just too far away. But there are photos now, the wings on the ground. It looks like the slats, the flaps were at least at 1 degree of position. That's the forward slats and the leading edge of the wing. It looks as though the flaps were at 5 degrees in the back of the airplane. So I think the flaps were deployed properly. You would have had all sorts of warnings going down the runway if they weren't, if they've been retracted prior to liftoff. So I think we can put the flap thing to rest. I think the wing stopped producing lift because of a loss of thrust. That's primarily what everybody agrees on these days. Okay, let me see. Savio Vega guy, all right. Given the hot conditions, 37 to 38 C. I've heard 43 C. So again, the temperature fluctuates wildly, but it was really hot that day. Let's just put it that way. How would high density altitude affect the 787's takeoff performance, especially in potentially overweight, or if there was an issue with thrust? I don't think anybody's saying they were overweight. They weren't at high altitude. They were at sea level, or basically sea level, 200 feet. It was hot that day, and that there are some factors with the heat. Airflow into the engines could be interrupted or disrupted with that amount of heat. I just put out a video talking about the potential, because a lot of people have been asking me about vapor lock. Check out that video where we talk about that. We have a thorough discussion about the potential of vapor lock. Am I saying that's what happened? I'm just saying that's one of the potentials of what could have happened. But vapor lock happens when there's high temperature, and the fuel could potentially turn from liquid to vapor. And if that happened, yeah, it's a potential that the engine could flame out. It's happened in the past. Could it have happened in this situation? Again, we're talking about 100 billion to 1 with everything that happened with this flight. So potentially, but the jury's still out on all this. All right, Mr. Nimbus Track. Several comments mentioned the Mayday call where pilots reportedly stated no thrust, losing power, or unable to lift. How much weight do you give these initial ATC communications in understanding the sequence of events? Well, it's one part of the puzzle, isn't it? And so, any one thing like the eyewitness saying there was a bang and the lights flickered, okay, that's one part. The captain or whoever making a Mayday call and saying thrust has not been achieved, that's another part. But when you combine that with, you can see the rat deployed and you can hear the rat flying by, now you know that it's most likely, especially when the wings were losing lift, there was a dual engine failure. That's consistent now with the Mayday call that says thrust wasn't achieved. That's all he could get out, right? He couldn't get out anymore because he was just seconds away from that airplane mushing into the ground. But what a brave guy to be able to key the mic and give us that much information. Awesome. So, all right, next question is, let me see, it's from 1320 Fastback. A significant number of commenters mentioned hearing or seeing evidence of the rat, the ram air turbine, being deployed. If the rat was indeed active, what would that tell us about the aircraft's condition, particularly regarding engine thrust or electrical power? Well, the rat deploys for 3 reasons on a 787. Significant electrical failure, significant hydraulic failure, or dual engine flame out or failure. So it could have been an electrical deal that brought it down. That the only one that is connected with the loss of lift over the wings is the dual engine failure. So that's why most people are camping there right now, because the wings stopped producing lift and the airplane just kind of mushed into the ground. And if it had been just an electrical failure or just a hydraulic failure, that rat would have deployed and they would have got enough electrics and enough hydraulic to keep flying, given the engines were at full thrust. They could have flown out of it. So it's most likely a dual engine failure, but that's a good question. All right. Arden Fogo writes, we saw dust kick up as the plane left the runway. Does this indicate that they used the entire runway or even overrun it? And what might that imply about their takeoff performance or a potential problem recognized late? It was 11,500-foot runway. I don't think they took off at the very end of the runway. Most pilots would reject the takeoff long before that. I think it indicates that it's probably pretty dry in that part of the world. And as those engines are producing a tremendous amount of thrust, you can see as they lift off and the thrust vector changes from like flat with the earth to kind of pounding down on the pavement and going out like that, it kicked up the dirt and the dust. It's probably been very dry over there. So you're seeing evidence that the engines are producing a lot of thrust, full thrust, not sure, but enough thrust to, man, kick up all that dirt. I think it's just evidence that the engines were running at that point. Shortly after that, not so much. All right. So there you go. There, Avery logged in. Writes the first officer reportedly had around 1,100 flight hours. In your experience, is this considered low for a 787? And could experience levels have been a contributing factor to handling the emergency? I'm not really going to go there. I'm not, I don't want to cast any dispersions on these guys. Let me put it this way. In the United States, to get hired, you have to have 1,500 hours to get hired at a regional carrier. Is 1,100 low for a wide body international pilot? Yeah, it doesn't mean he wasn't a good pilot. He's probably a great pilot. Maybe he's really good. That's why he got hired and he's got this position with 1,100 hours. So I'm sure these guys had great training. They passed their check rides, no problems there. But yeah, in the States, that would be unheard of, right? But these guys were great pilots. I have nothing but good things to say about them. John H. Pearson III, 7025. What does thrust not achieve actually mean from a pilot's perspective? Well, I think it speaks for itself. And let me say something about either the captain or the first officer, whoever keyed up the mic and made that Mayday call. You don't know who it was. These guys they're the best pilots in the world, right? They're flying a 777. The training and the rigor and to get to that place is enormous. They're very good at what they do, and they have my extreme admiration because they do it in a second language, right? If I had to speak French or German or something like that, I think I wouldn't be a pilot. It'd be too difficult for me. But these guys all do it in a foreign tongue. And the fact that he got a Mayday call out and he said it in English, that's what presence of mind, right? To do that. He gave us a little glimpse into what was going on. This airplane was doomed and going down, but he got one last transmission out, which helps us to piece together what potentially happened. It's just awesome. Leon Mylar 1532. How common is rat deployment, and have you ever had to deal with it? It's extremely uncommon. It is a last resort item, most often associated with a dual engine failure. There have been some rat deployments in the past history, but very, very few. I think you can probably count on 2 or 3 fingers the number of rat deployments. And no, I have never experienced that, nor do I ever want to experience that. Would a simulator prepare a pilot for this kind of engine failure scenario? No, not really. I mean, we don't practice something like this. We do. I have had some training with taking off and then landing again on a long enough runway. That's a potential. This was a 11,500-foot runway, which is a fairly long runway. But it was hot that day, and so that would extend their takeoff roll. They were also very heavy, which would extend their takeoff roll. So they probably took off farther down the runway. But honestly, once you get to that rotate speed and you achieve flight, you can't really land on the runway ahead of you. If it was like, I don't know, maybe 30,000 feet long, maybe you could, but that's really not a possibility. So the next is a milepost 196.5. How much time did the pilots actually have? Just 30 to 36 seconds after takeoff. That's what I've heard. And you can watch the video from beginning to end. The time they rotate to the time they impact that building, it's under a minute. And so again, the rat was not designed to help in that situation. And it's a shame. It's a shame. If you have a situation like that where you lose complete lift at that phase of flight, we all watched it, right? All right. Rory in real, if there was an issue with incorrect flap gear configuration, why wouldn't the aircraft's advanced warning system, similar to takeoff configuration warnings, alert the pilots immediately and loudly about becoming airborne? They didn't take off with the flaps up because of that very reason. These warning systems are so loud and so thorough, there's no way that that's even a potential possibility. So the flaps were in the proper takeoff position for takeoff. Zenith Grove writes some comments suggest a catastrophic electrical failure, possibly linked to reports of AC and in-flight entertainment issues on a previous flight sector of this same aircraft. Could an electrical problem cascade into loss of thrust and control on a 787? I really doubt it. I don't see any connection between those, other than the fact that the rat could deploy if there was a major enough electrical failure on a 787. But no, there's no connection I know of that would cause that. The engines would still be producing thrust. They're getting fuel, they're getting air, they're still going to produce thrust even if everything goes dark in the airplane. Right? We've got M. Maple Theory. If the pilots did lose thrust or experienced a dual engine failure, what are the immediate actions they would be trained to take, and why might they have been unable to maintain flight or attempt a controlled emergency landing? There is a checklist on every 777, every 787 that would be a dual engine failure checklist. It's a pretty simple checklist, but it's really designed for a dual engine failure at altitude, where you've got some altitude. You can start gliding down. You're going to pick an airspeed, probably about 250 knots. You're going to start gliding down gently, and then you're going to basically take both fuel control levers to cut off and then back to run to kind of reset the system. While in some airplanes you turn the actual engine igniters on, others it's all done automatically when you reset it. And some airplanes even do all that for you automatically. They try to relight the engines. I'm not a 787 pilot, but it would be a very simple procedure to do that. There was no chance in the 30 to 40 seconds that they had that they were going to do that. It's just not. All right. Jeff Talk Daily. There's a debate about whether the aircraft stalled. Based on the videos showing its flight path and attitude, does it look like a classic aerodynamic stall? And what could have induced it so quickly after takeoff? Well, did the airplane stall? The wings stopped producing lift. And so you see the classic indications of that. The nose comes over for a little bit. They're trying to get some more lift over the wings. They're not getting the lift, mostly because the engines probably stopped producing thrust at that point. There's no thrust coming out. They're losing airspeed. They're losing lift. They're losing lift. The nose is going to come up. The rear end of the airplane is going to sag a little bit. Those wings are going to try to produce more thrust or more lift. And the pilot is most likely pulling back on the yoke because he's getting closer and closer to the ground. That's what I would do without thrust. And they just kind of, you see that classic, they kind of just mush into the ground. So they were in probably some early stages of a stall, but the wings had just completely run out of energy. All right. Last question. Here we go. Sydney Signal. Could issues like fuel contamination, as one commentator, and they've got the commentator here, detailed extensively regarding water in fuel, be a plausible cause for a dual engine flameout on a 787? You can't rule it out. And so fuel starvation, more specifically, is what you really need to talk about. And there are three basic ways that fuel can be starved to any type of engine, but jet engine in particular in this one. It could be through the fuel was cut off at the fuel control levers. I do that every time I park the airplane at the gate. That's such a cockamamie idea that we're going to throw that in the dustbin of history. That's not what happened. The other two, they're possible. Contamination of the fuel, such as water or such as actual contaminants like dirt or twigs or dirt, could that have possibly clogged up the system and fuel starved both engines at the same time? It's possible. Again, everything in this crash is 100 billion to 1, but yep, it's possible that could have happened. It's very improbable because of the machines that they use to fuel the airplanes with. They detect even a drop of fuel. I've talked to many licensed fuelers over the years, and they all talk about how wonderful and incredible these machines are. They would automatically shut off fueling at that point, and then they would go and they'd trace all of the contaminants in the fuel supply to make sure that there weren't any. It's very, very rare. The other is vapor lock scenario. I just put out a video talking about vapor lock, and that's a possibility, right? But is it a big P possibility, a little p? It's worthy of discussion, that's all. But that would be another way that fuel starvation would happen in any type of engine, and this one is not excluded from it. So those are the answers so far. So folks, thanks for your questions. I know that you're really, really concerned about what happened over there in India. My heart goes out to everybody. And part of what we really try to do on this channel is reassure you that it is safe to fly. It is still the safest way to travel, even though these things they make the front page of the news, and we have to talk about them. But the community in aviation talks about them in order to prevent these things from ever happening again. And I'm here to tell you that this was 100 billion to 1. And you say, well, that's pretty high odds. Yeah, it also bodes for the fact that the likelihood of this ever happening again is basically zero. All right, we're going to get to the bottom of why this happened eventually, and then we'll learn from it. We'll make the adjustments as necessary so that it is absolute zero, that it never happens again. So, folks, thanks for joining me on this special edition of Ask the Captain. I'm Captain Steve. We'll see you next time.